And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Carolina Torres, who is an associate professor and endowed chair in tree fruit post-harvest systems at Washington State University. And Carolina has experience in post-harvest research that's focused on fruit physiology and biochemistry, as well as post-harvest systems in palm and stone fruit. So bringing it full circle with some information about post-harvest, I will hand it over to you, Dr. Torres. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Molly. I'm going to share my screen now with my presentation. All right. Can you see it?
That looks great. You're in the slide mode, but we can see all the slides.
Now? Yeah.
Yes.
Now
Great.
it's better. Yeah, I don't know why, because I have two screens. It does that weird thing.
Looking good now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very excited to give this talk. There is a lot of people and that's great. So we can reach more industry members in the Pacific Northwest. I've been, lucky that I started pre-harvest and now for a big while, I've been doing post-harvest. And so I've been actually all my post-harvest career, I've been putting both pieces together, which are really critical. And so today I'm going to sum up everything that we see post-harvest that climate has a big influence over. The talk today is seasonal hot climate and its effect on fruit quality post-harvest. And this is not only true for apples, but for palm fruit in general and other tree fruit. Apple quality is a combination, or the effect over apple quality comes from a combination of factors. And definitely critical pre-harvest climate and seasonal changes on climate plays a big role. Orchard management, within that, of course, soil, nutrition, it's critical. The way the trees are trained and the canopy management also plays a big role. And definitely in the case of apple and pears, definitely fruit position on the tree plays a role. All the fruit gets together in that bin at the end, but those are different phenotypes that are put together and they're stored the same and they're processed the same. And sometimes the differences between those pieces of fruit is very, it's impactful on fruit quality post-harvest. And another important issue here is harvest maturity. And harvest maturity affects progression of ripening post-harvest and the onset of physiological disorders. So it's a very critical piece of condition that affect the quality post-harvest. The premise for post-harvest is we can never improve fruit quality. We can maintain it, and that's all we can do. So if we harvest poor quality fruit, we're going to get poor quality fruit post-harvest, especially if we push that fruit along a long supply chain and cold chain. The more we push it, the worse it gets if the quality wasn't good at harvest. And then the other big piece, of course, is the way we store that fruit and conditions that we actually use on that post-harvest system. In my career, I've been looking at the effect of hot and dry environments on fruit quality overall. And this can happen seasonal, the way it happened this time in the Pacific Northwest. This 2021 season was really hard on temperature, on climate across the area, but also growing sites. There is a lot of microclimates around here, and I'm from Chile originally, and where we grow fruit, there is a lot of microclimate. We have two mountain chain, and the Central Valley has different influences from these from the mountains. And so it's a lot of microclimates, and things can change from one microclimate to the other. And then the other thing we're of course we have on palm fruit is that we are not only worried about the fruit quality at harvest, but we want that fruit to last for a long time, a year and more. right, in the case of apples. So we, in that process of after being harvested, come out of the tree, we put it in bins, we chill that fruit as fast as we can, because that's what we want, right? To reduce respiration, reduce fruit metabolism, to be able to be in that very, in the minimum, with the minimum activity to be able to last long. And after that, we process, we submit that fruit to different processing treatments, and then we ship them overseas and seas in the case of when we export that fruit, main focus for Chile. And then we put it in display, gets to the different markets, and then the consumer buys it. And we want that fruit to be as perfect as we can. So with the climate change situation, things haven't gotten easier at all for segregation, segregate that fruit at harvest with the right, for the right post-harvest system we want, right? If we actually, I mean, in general, if we are going to harvest the fruit a little bit later, past the optimum maturity stage, we shouldn't store that fruit long, because we know already forever that it's going to last less and we're going to see problems. But marketing always has that thing of head to head with quality department, and so they want to sell the fruit later, and quality department is saying no, we cannot do it, but they just do it anyways, and we find a lot of problems. Now with the climate change, we are actually facing extreme events during the growing season. For example, this huge heat wave that we had last year, but also in some other situations we might have frost, hail, and even rain in summer, and that doesn't really help on quality, or at least we don't know what's going to happen with those events. And then so those hotter seasons sometimes bring hotter nights, and that's another issue, and that it goes against overall fruit quality. And so in terms of the post-harvest area, we're working with unpredictable overall quality and condition of that fruit post-harvest. So we don't know how long that fruit is going to last, what's going to be the rate of softening of that fruit, where can that fruit go, right? What international market can we reach? Something happened here. There we go. And what we see throughout that cold chain is that physiological disorders start to develop. Sunburned fruit, even if it's mild or only the sun exposed side of the fruit, start developing this brownish area on top, on the skin, called sun scald. Also another variety like Fuji is called stain. We also start seeing lenticel issues and internal browning and breakdown in that fruit all along that storage season. And so when we're talking about maturity progression, since it's a critical piece on fruit quality, in warmer seasons, we tend to harvest, or people harvest earlier, right? Because they're following maturity progression pre-harvest, and they want to harvest with the maturity indices that they are using every day. Every season, that is the optimum time to pick that variety. And so sometimes in some seasons, they're harvesting a week earlier or even 2 weeks earlier to meet those criteria. And really, in different seasons, although they are doing that, they're harvesting earlier because maturity is progressing faster in a warmer season, they get unpredictable results. And they get different progression of maturity post-harvest and development of different physiological disorders. So one of the first thing I started working in Chile was to look at this maturity progression. Not the first thing, but one of the things that got me thinking is that if people actually is harvesting 1 or 2 weeks earlier because it is really a warm season, what was going on? What did it mean? Why the fruit looked different, developed different physiological disorders, and so I wanted to see. And then some people say, well, firmness. The weird thing about the season, fruit stayed firm, but chlorophyll degradation was faster, and the starch index moved really fast, but my fruit is still firm. So I don't know what to do, when to harvest, what to, what index to believe. And so we started this study and looking at this progression of maturity pre-harvest, looking at all the different maturity indices available for apples. So starch index degradation, the change from green to yellow, background skin color, flesh firmness, internal ethylene concentration, of course, external color as a harvest index, not a maturity index, accumulation of solid solids. And the way that people do this maturity progression, they go to the field, start 4 or 5 a month, or 3 to 4 weeks prior harvest, and they start sampling fruit from a specific portion of the tree and looking at the way these maturity indices move throughout the days. If they have, during that period of time, warmer, higher temperatures, they will at the end decide to harvest a little bit earlier. And so that's the way the industry does it. The other thing I was looking at is the climate during that growing season. So to be able to have a good assessment of this, we follow one group of trees from a commercial orchard, and follow the maturity on those trees for 4 different seasons. So to actually differentiate those seasons, we looked at growing degree hour, growing degree days. If we look at that bioclimatic index, growing degree hours, not much difference between the 4 different seasons. If we looked at growing degree day, we do see some separation between the 4 different seasons. But if we actually looked at vapor pressure deficit, which we call stress units, we see a very big separation between the 4 seasons, 2 of them being warmer than normal and the other 2 being cooler than normal. And warmer means 30% above average in temperatures, and cooler meaning 30% below average season. And so that was one thing we noticed. In the warmer seasons, we saw in the 2 warmer seasons a sharper increase of ethylene, and that occurred a little bit earlier in the season, and a faster decline of flesh firmness. So firmness was actually responsive to the stress index, right? Those cooler and warmer seasons. Now, in a warmer season, we see a 0.24, we did see pound decline per day, versus in a cooler season, a 0.13 pound decline on flesh firmness per day. So if we actually, if we just hear in the from the growers on those different the opinions of how maturity is progressing, those different seasons, you never get a good glimpse of what really is going on, but you do when you follow the same group of trees in an orchard, in a setting. Okay, so the other thing we saw is in a warmer season, we got a faster decline on starch index, and that started after 120 days after full bloom, but then no clear pattern change on the background color between green and yellow. So chlorophyll degradation wasn't a very good indicator of separating those warm from those cool seasons. Now, when we looked at all the data together, we see a much better correlation on a warm season between the change of starch index degradation or pattern, degradation pattern, and ethylene production. This is a royal gala. Galas are very responsive to ethylene. You can actually monitor ripening by measuring internal ethylene concentration, but definitely you're not getting a very good correspondence between the ethylene production and some of the maturity indices we use to assess fruit maturity on apples. And but in a warmer season, according to our data, we get a much better correlation of ethylene with that starch index degradation. I mean, increase, right? Degradation of starch. Now, since we are harvesting earlier in a warmer season, we are actually entering post-harvest with pretty much, an average, pretty constant firmness, right? And here you see that we're moving from 16.5 to 17.5 pound in all of the seasons at the start of storage, but a totally different decline in fruit firmness between a warm season versus a cool season. In a warm season, we got 1.5 to 2.5 pound decline per month in RA storage, versus in a cool season, half of that, a pound of loss of firmness per month in an RA. Now, do we care about this if we're using 1-MCP, the ethylene blocker? No, we don't see this, but it is a critical piece of information for organic production of apples, because we are actually betting on harvest maturity, the precision of trying to get the best harvest maturity and more predictable, because we need to work with that when we store the fruit without any ethylene blocker. So yes, organic fruit critical and no MCP. But we do know that softening is faster even after harvest in a warmer season compared to a cooler season. Do we need a new maturity indices? Well, we think we do. And we are working in general, I'm talking about research around the world, on non-destructive ways to really measure maturity on apples and pears especially. And definitely today, without those new tools, we need to know that we need to use more than one maturity index to determine fruit maturity, because they move in different rates. Some of them are early ripening maturity indices and others are later, so they move at a different rate, and some years they predict maturity better than others. The ones we're using on apples have they were developed in 1950s, so yeah, they are due. Okay, so the next part of my talk is physiological disorders. Yeah, we might have a higher ripening rate, but at the end of the day, we are seeing development of defects on the fruit that we are gonna, that fruit is not gonna be able to be sold, and we're gonna lose money, right? So this is critical. And so the first critical thing here is identify what are we talking about. It is critical to know what it's the name, or what disorder it is. If we don't know, there's nothing we can do about it next season, right? Because in post-harvest, you are like a doctor, you're diagnosing what is it, but then there's not much to do. You just have to wait for next season to do it better. Change your cooling procedures, change your storage temperature, worry about quality pre-harvest, nutrition, especially, and crop load and other factors. There's little we can do post-harvest to reduce the incidence, the time that we're in the storage season, we're looking at this. But yes, we can do it in the future. So some of these disorders, we see it only on the peel, right? And when they're only on the peel, they can be several things, right? Superficial scald, the onset of it is totally different as sun scald, or it could be chemical damage. There is something we are applying to those rooms of fruit where we're seeing phytotoxicity. So we should be able to identify first to do something about it. And when it's in the flesh, it's even, well, not even, but it's also very challenging, because some of those internal brownings, they come from different factors, pre-harvest even and post-harvest. Low temperature breakdown looks pretty similar to flesh browning, that it could mean a disorder more linked to other multifactorial events pre-harvest, including pre-harvest, the stamen flesh browning, core flush, stem cavity browning, or even chemical damage also has some browning, flesh browning events when it happens, senescent browning and CO2 injury. So some of the predisposing factors for all these different disorders are definitely climate, productive conditions, and these are just to be very brief about it. Harvest maturity, a critical one, cultivar susceptibility for sure, and the way we store the fruit, right? Storage regime, temperature we use, how long the fruit is stored. Fruit is senescing when it is in storage. So at the end of the storage season, there is a lot of senescent related disorders that it happened because the fruit doesn't have any more life, right? CO2 and oxygen levels on that storage rooms and treatments that the fruit has post-harvest. I'm just going to name some of those disorders that we see post-harvest that come from hot and dry environments. The first thing I'm going to mention, but we've had good talks before, my colleagues, about sun stress related disorder, and one of them is sunburn, and that's those sunburn or the sun exposure of the fruit on the periphery of the tree has a huge implication. Sunburn, we see it, it is visible, but there is tons of other, not tons, but many other invisible effect of sun exposure. So again, it's just amazing that in one piece of fruit, you will have half of the fruit with a phenotype of sun exposure, directly exposed to sun, and the other half of the fruit is in the shade, right? And it's totally different phenotype from the other side. So in one organ, you have two different phenotypes expressing in order to acclimate to their specific environment they're growing on the tree. The other situation we see, especially in susceptible varieties like galas, is overmaturity leading to splits, right? And another cracking. And so that is cultivar dependent, very linked to overmaturity. Rain, an event of rain before harvest, right? The soil also involved in the water content on the soil and the humidity in the orchard. But even if galas are harvested a little bit on the overmature side, you will hear them popping when they go through a pre-sizer post-harvest, touching water, because that area on the stem end, it's maturing faster than the rest of the apples, right? Has more ethylene, those cells are longer and thinner, and so they separate easier than the ones in the equator of the fruit, and so they tend to open easier. And again, if you actually store fruit without sunburn or just mild symptoms of sunburn, in the case of Granny Smith, they will develop sun scald, which is this browning, oxidated looking area on top of the sun exposed section of the fruit. And in the case of Fuji, also it's called, or it's pretty much a similar disorder, and it's called stain. And these are a product of high light and high heat in the orchard, and they have no control. There's nothing we can do post-harvest. The synthetic antioxidant, natural antioxidant, they don't do anything. They don't prevent it. Or low oxygen storage atmosphere, they don't prevent it. Higher storage temperature, nothing. It will appear regardless. The other thing we see post-harvest are lenticel issues or pits, right? And we just have to try to diagnose that first to be able to tackle it. And there are two big groups of this disorder. One of them related to nutrition, right? And that is bitter pit, lenticel blotch pit, deficiency and disbalances between different cations, calcium versus magnesium, potassium, and then nitrogen. And oops, that is two magnesiums there. And the other disorder is the one related to the abiotic stress. The fruit is suffering pre-harvest plus post-harvest management and processing in the line, right? And this is typical and increasing over time, which is the lenticule breakdown disorder. Now, how do you differentiate both? If you peel, there is usually no flesh compromised on the lenticule breakdown disorder, and there is in a nutritional disorder. And so that's the first way of distinguish both of them. Lenticule breakdown disorder appears mainly after fruit has been processed in the line. You see a little bit before, or actually depressed lenticels without the browning, but definitely it expresses fully after fruit has been packed. And so a lot has been studied on the way you should process this fruit post-harvest. Mainly in galas, it's a big issue, but you can see it in any variety really. And as the climate gets more hotter and stressful, we will see it in different varieties more and more. So galas are treated very mild, very softly in the line to be able to avoid the problem. Now, the problem with lenticule breakdown disorder is that after those boxes are ready to go, they look at them, do QC on them, and there's not much lenticule breakdown. It appears after the fruit has been shipped to the different markets and open in those markets, and even in when they're displayed on the supermarket. So it is critical.
Carolina, thank you so much for. We're running out of time on your presentation. So
I'm sorry. I'm gonna I have 4 more slides. So another thing that you might see also, it's a lot of bruising on warmer seasons because the fruit is harvested a little later, and it's older in age as time goes by post-harvest. And in older fruit, there's more intercellular spaces and bruises are larger. And the last thing, but not the least, is the fruit acclimation to cold storage. In a warmer season, especially hot nights, all the chilling injury disorder expressed on susceptible varieties, and we see a variety of internal browning, soft scald, superficial scald, and other skin browning post-harvest throughout the storage season. And so then we just have to think about what should we do? Should we do conditioning? Well, if to decrease metabolism and respiration, we should cool fast, lower our storage temperature as much as we can to lower respiration, but then we get the chilling related disorders. So maybe what we should do is actually condition, stepwise cool that fruit so it can acclimate to the low temperature storage in order to reduce the additional stress that fruit has, but that has a negative effect over overall fruit quality, right? So we're dealing, especially with Honeycrisp, with this balance of what should we do. And it is changes seasonally, how much the fruit is susceptible to chilling injury after harvest. So just to summarize what we thought this year, this warm and hot wave, heat wave in the Pacific Northwest would have affected different quality on apple, pears, and cherries, sweet cherries. Here's a list of them. In all of them, less storage potential overall. Apples and pears, smaller fruit, the presence of sun scald throughout the storage season, and definitely higher maturity rates. For only apples, internal browning, corkiness, lenticule breakdown disorder, reduced 1-MCP effectiveness because fruit is actually being harvested a little bit on the over-mature side with already producing ethylene, right? So the blocker can block so many receptors, and higher greasiness in prone cultivars, higher susceptibility of the fruit to chilling injury, and more bitter pit. For pears, a good thing, less chilling requirement to ripen post-harvest, and we already have seen that this season. Early senescent related disorders, some of the fruit throughout in this area, we're seeing that too. And in sweet cherry, less stem quality, it's already gone and passed, and we can analyze the data. We'll hear Matt in a little while. Increased pitting, and for next year crop, increase in doubles and fruit deformation. So finally, yes, environmental stress, combining air temperature and relative humidity is definitely a better tool to separate cooler and warmer seasons than just using air temperatures in some environments as a bioclimatic index. Warmer season, fruit is ripening faster, and that will continue post-harvest. And so, and we have to really think about this, because although fruit is harvested with the same maturity indices year after year, they have a different metabolism, and they will ripen faster post-harvest coming from a warmer and more stressful season. And that will affect a lot of things post-harvest, including the development of physiological disorders. Thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Carolina, for sharing that with us. I think I'm going to defer the questions to the Q&A chat box just in the interest of time, and appreciate your presentation, Carolina. I think you covered some really important questions that many of us had, which especially when it came to the maturity indices, what are we to use? So look forward to having more discussion around that as well.